January 17th, 1991. Operation Desert Storm. In the skies over Baghdad, protected by the densest and most advanced Soviet-made air defense system of its time, something incredible is happening. Iraqi anti-aircraft gunners are peering into the night sky in panic as their command posts, communication hubs, and bunkers are turned into fiery hells, one after another. On the radar screens, an ominous silence. Not a single target detected. At that moment, the F-117 Nighthawk was in the sky, the world's first production-style aircraft, an American marvel of engineering and a symbol of the Pentagon's absolute technological dominance. But few know that 30 years before this US Air Force triumph, in 1962, the Sovietskoye Radio publishing house released an inconspicuous booklet with a print run of just 1,800 copies. On its modest cover, it read, "Method of Edge Waves in the Physical Theory of Diffraction." The author was a 31-year-old Soviet scientist, theoretical physicist Pyotr Ufimtsev. It was in this unassuming monograph, ignored by the generals in their monumental offices on Staraya Square, that contained the formulas which forever changed the balance of power in the world's skies. Ufimtsev proved what was considered impossible: how to make a wind machine invisible to radar using a special geometry. Consider this paradox. The Soviet Union created the theoretical foundation of stealth technology, but discarded it as a hopeless scientific abstraction. Meanwhile, the Americans, having stumbled upon a translated copy of the booklet, built the aviation of the 21st century based on Soviet equations. Comrades, have you ever wondered how did it happen that the colossal machine of Soviet science, which spent billions of rubles on the defense complex, gifted its arch-nemesis the main secret to air supremacy? Was it a tragic miscalculation by the bureaucratic officials, a result of the ossification of the Gosplan system? Or did a much darker story lie behind this decision, a secret KGB operation that forced the Pentagon to spend trillions of dollars on flying irons? Today, we will open the folder stamped Top Secret, look behind the closed doors of Soviet research institutes, and examine all versions, from dry archival facts to the most intriguing conspiracy theories. To understand why the Soviet defense industry overlooked a revolution, we need to travel back to the late 50s and early 60s. This was the time of Khrushchev's thaw, the triumph of Soviet cosmonautics, and the unbridled faith in the great Soviet machine. The newspaper Pravda was filled with headlines about overfulfilling five-year plans, and above the Siberian taiga and the steppes of Kazakhstan, secret closed cities sprang up, where behind barbed wire the nation's nuclear shield was being forged. In the military aviation of that era, a single doctrine reigned supreme: higher, faster, more powerful. Soviet designers, the legendary Tupolev, Mikoyan, Sukhoi, competed with the Americans in speed and altitude. If your fighter flies at 3 times the speed of sound, like the MiG-25, and climbs into the stratosphere, then what difference does it make if radar see it? It will simply outrun any missile. The Soviet Union's main priority in those years was creating an impenetrable air defense system. Soviet troops were equipped with the most powerful radar stations. The philosophy of the Soviet generals was simple and brutal. Radiation of megawatt power would crush any camouflage. Why hide an aircraft if you can burn out the radar's receiver? If an American plane is flying in our sky, we must illuminate it so brightly that the radar screen flares up. Why make a stealth aircraft if you can create a radar so powerful it can see a sparrow 300 kilometers away? And it was in this atmosphere of industrial gigantism that a modest senior researcher worked at the Radio Engineering Institute of the USSR Academy of Sciences, Pyotr Ufimtsev. Ufimtsev's fate is a classic drama of the Soviet intelligentsia. Hailing from a family of a deculacized peasant from the Altai region, whose father was repressed by the system, Pyotr had been practically blind in one eye since childhood. Yet his mathematical genius broke through all social barriers. Ufimtsev was interested in a narrow, purely theoretical problem of fundamental physics: how electromagnetic waves scatter on bodies of complex shape. Before Ufimtsev, physics could only calculate the reflection of radio waves from simple, ideal shapes: a sphere, a cylinder, or a flat surface. To calculate the reflection from a real aircraft, the so-called radar cross-section, or RCS, was used. The larger the RCS, the better a radar can see the object. Ufimtsev made a fundamental discovery. He proved that the reflection of a radio wave depends not only on the object's surface area, but also on its edges and facets. An electromagnetic wave, hitting a discontinuity in the fuselage, generates a so-called edge wave. Pyotr Yakovlevich derived mathematical formulas that allowed for the calculation of the RCS for an object of absolutely any geometric shape. By introducing the concept of the physical theory of diffraction, he effectively created a mathematical tool that allowed for the design of aircraft with a predetermined minimal visibility to radars. Ufimtsev demonstrated that if smooth curves were removed from the aircraft's surface, its fuselage made to consist of flat panels, facets, and these panels arranged at specific angles, then the reflected radio signal would not return to the radar antenna, but would scatter away into emptiness. In 1962, Ufimtsev compiled his research into a scientific monograph. According to strict Soviet regulations, the manuscript was sent for review to the relevant mailboxes, close military research institutes, and the Ministry of Defense. The military censors and academic bosses paged through the formula-filled pages for a long time. The conclusion of the commission of the Military Industrial Commission under the USSR Council of Ministers was unwavering. The work of citizen Ufimtsev is of a purely theoretical, fundamental nature, has no practical application in military aircraft construction, cannot have any in the foreseeable future, and is not permitted for open publication. Why did the Soviet bureaucratic machine deliver such a verdict? There were three solid reasons. First, the lack of computing power. To calculate a three-dimensional model of even a small aircraft using Ufimtsev's formulas required millions of mathematical operations. In 1962, Soviet computers, such as the BESM-2, were bulky vacuum tube machines, busy calculating trajectories for ballistic missiles and thermonuclear charges. No one was going to allocate their resources to the fantasies of a young physicist. Second, an aerodynamic dead end. An aircraft constructed from flat facets, from the point of view of classical aerodynamics, turned into a flying iron. It simply could not stay in the air. In the 60s, computer-based fly-by-wire control systems, which could make hundreds of micro-corrections with the control surfaces per second to keep an aerodynamically unstable machine in flight, did not yet exist. Third, departmental barriers. In the USSR, science was strictly segmented. The Academy of Sciences dealt with pure theory, while the design bureaus of Tupolev or Mikoyan dealt with hardware. Aircraft designers looked down on academic physicists, stating, "You write formulas for us, but we need an airplane that flies at 2,500 kilometers per hour and carries 5 tons of bombs." Ufimtsev's monograph was reduced to a modest print run of 1,800 copies. The published books were distributed to the libraries of research institutes, placed on shelves, and safely gathered dust for a decade and a half. And now, let's move to 1975, to the city of Burbank, California, a secret unit of the Lockheed Company, the famous Skunk Works, led by Ben Rich. America was in shock after the Vietnam War and the 1973 Arab-Israeli conflict. Soviet S-75 and Kvadrat anti-aircraft missile systems were shooting down American and Israeli aircraft by the dozens. the Pentagon announced a competition to create a concept for an invisible airplane. A young software engineer, Dennis Overholzer, while reviewing translations of foreign scientific articles regularly produced by the US Air Force's Foreign Technology Division, stumbles upon an English-language translation of Ufimtsev's book, made as early as 1971. Overholzer wasn't just an engineer. He understood programming. Unlike the USSR of 1962, the USA in 1975 already had supercomputers and the first engineering graphics environment. Dennis Overholzer took Ufimtsev's formulas and, based on them, wrote a computer program called Echo 1. He later recalled that he read Ufimtsev's work and realized that this guy had found the Holy Grail. His mathematics made it possible to calculate how a radio signal would reflect from any flat surface. And all that needed to be done was to build an airplane out of flat triangles. The Echo 1 program made it possible to design an airframe consisting of hundreds of flat facets in a matter of days. This is how the Hopeless Diamond project was born, which later evolved into the Have-Blue prototype and then into the production attack aircraft, the F-117 Nighthawk. And what about Pyotr Ufimtsev? He continued working in Moscow, completely unaware that on the other side of the globe, in the Nevada desert, black, faceted ghosts were already flying according to his formulas. But if the official version sounds like a classic tale of Soviet bureaucratic blindness and American engineering ingenuity, then why did entirely different, much darker and more convoluted versions circulate in the archives and scientific smoke-filled rooms of those years? Let's delve into the shadowy side of this story, to where the dry reports of Gosplan don't rule, but the laws of espionage, disinformation, and behind-the-scenes wars over billion-dollar military budgets do. The first conspiracy theory, still hotly debated by veterans of Soviet intelligence, states: the open publication of Ufimtsev's monograph was not negligence, but a brilliantly conceived operation by the KGB and Lubyanka. Imagine the early 70s. The first chief directorate of the KGB of the USSR was perfectly aware that the US economy was entering a period of crisis and that the Pentagon was looking for a silver bullet against the Soviet air defense system. What did the Soviet strategists do? They authorized the leak of Ufimtsev's works to the West. What was the plan of the Trojan horse? Soviet radar specialists knew physics excellently. Yes, stealth technology, based on faceting, reduces an aircraft's visibility in the centimeter and millimeter wave ranges, precisely those in which American airborne radars and missile guidance systems operate. However, Soviet air defense radar systems developed along a completely different path. Since the 50s, the USSR had bet on the meter wave band, and the wavelength of the meter band, from 1 to 10 meters, is comparable to the size of the aircraft itself. For a meter wave radar, it is absolutely irrelevant whether the aircraft has facets, is coated with radar-absorbent materials, or what its geometric shape is. In the meter band, the effect of resonance scattering occurs. The stealth aircraft, for the long-wave Soviet radar, lights up like a Christmas tree. As veterans of air defense recalled, our specialists knew that the American invisible plane was only invisible to their own radars. For our meter-wave P-18 stations, it was a regular, slow, and clumsy iron that couldn't even maneuver away from a missile. According to this hypothesis, the plan of the Lubyanka was genius and insidious. To make the US swallow the bait and pour hundreds of billions of dollars into developing aircraft that would be completely ineffective against the Soviet national defense system. To force the US Air Force to abandon the speed and maneuverability of aviation in favor of expensive, maintenance-heavy, and aerodynamically flawed technology. The Americans spent tens of billions of dollars on the F-117 program. They built only 59 aircraft, which required sterile hangars with a special microclimate to preserve the radar-absorbent coating. And all this for machines that Soviet meter-band radars could see from hundreds of kilometers away. The second version takes us away from international spy games to an internal, no less brutal war within the Soviet Union itself. A war between academic science and the Red Barons, the all-powerful directors of aviation plants and general designers. In the USSR of the 70s, the military-industrial complex was a state within a state. General designers such as Tupolev, Mikoyan, Sukhoi had direct access to the country's leadership. They commanded colossal resources. Entire cities and giant factories were built for their projects. Tons of scarce titanium and the best special supply rations for employees were allocated. And into this well-oiled, well-fed system, where billions of rubles were allocated for 3 5-year plans ahead for the construction of the next heavy, powerful fighters, comes a 30-year-old candidate of sciences, Ufimtsev. He brings his papers and says, "Comrade generals, all your new aircraft are obsolete. We need to change the shape of the fuselages, make them ugly, abandon maximum speeds, and build completely new factories." The reaction of the Red Barons was predictable. For them, stealth technology was a mortal threat to their personal empires. To acknowledge Ufimtsev's correctness would mean having to scrap the ready blueprints of the Su-27 and MiG-29, hand over budgets to the physicists, and admit that the old academicians had fallen behind the times. A real persecution unfolded in the corridors of the Academy of Sciences. Ufimtsev was explicitly told, "Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Stick to fundamental mathematics, and don't teach us how to build airplanes." Legend has it that when one of his colleagues tried to get through to the Minister of Aviation Industry with a report on stealth technology, the minister replied with a concise Soviet aphorism: "We don't need ugly airplanes that can't fly. A Soviet airplane must be fast and beautiful, like the dream of communism." As a result, Ufimtsev's project was deliberately buried in bureaucratic red tape. So where does the line lie between conspiracy and the harsh truth of history? The version that the KGB deliberately fed Ufimtsev's works to the Americans falls apart under serious analysis. The Americans found the monograph through routine work. A special unit of the US Air Force was translating all available Soviet scientific and technical literature. The translation of the book lay in the Pentagon library for almost 4 years until it was accidentally fished out by Dennis Overholser. There was no cunning Secret Service plan there, just the colossal American machine for collecting and analyzing open-source data. Moreover, in 1991 in Iraq, the F-117s flew over 1,200 combat sorties over Baghdad without losing a single aircraft, utterly crushing the Iraqi air defense system, which was built on Soviet designs. The idea that meter-band radars make stealth useless turned out to be only a partial truth. A long-wave radar can indeed detect the presence of an aircraft in the air, but it has low accuracy and sees the target as a huge blurry spot dozens of kilometers in size. You cannot guide a surface-to-air missile using a meter-band radar. Precisely the centimeter-band radars are required for accurate targeting, and for those, the F-117 remained invisible. So why couldn't the USSR build its own stealth aircraft in the 70s? The answer is simple. The USSR had hit an insurmountable wall in the field of computing technology. To calculate the shape of the stealth aircraft with smooth lines required the colossal power of supercomputers, and by the end of the 70s, Soviet computers were years behind their American counterparts. Furthermore, the F-117 was completely unstable in flight, and the pilot could not physically control it. A triple digital computer did this for him, making up to 80 corrections per second. In the USSR, there simply were no reliable and compact onboard computers for such a job. Finally, the Soviet chemical industry could not create sufficiently light and durable radar-absorbent coatings. However, on March 27, 1999, during the bombing of Yugoslavia, a crew of an old Soviet S-125 Ekora anti-aircraft missile system under the command of Serbian Colonel Zoltan Dani accomplished the impossible. They shot down an American F-117 Nighthawk. The Serbs used the very tactics that Soviet theorists had been insisting on. They used an old meter-band radar to detect the approximate area where the aircraft was present, lay in wait for the moment when the F-117 opened its bomb bay doors to drop a bomb, causing its radar signature to spike hundreds of times, briefly turned on a centimeter-band radar, and launched missiles. This episode proved that the perfect invisible weapon does not exist, but stealth remained a colossal tactical advantage that reshaped the rules of warfare. And what became of the man who started this epoch-making race? Until the end of the 80s, Pyotr Yakovlevich Ufimtsev lived and worked in Moscow, remaining a modest doctor of physical and mathematical sciences. In the USSR, he never received either the Lenin Prize or a personal gold medal for his discovery. In 1990, Ufimtsev was invited to the USA, where the University of California offered him a faculty position. Abroad, he was welcomed as a living legend. The leaders of Northrop Grumman, the creators of the strategic stealth bomber B-2 Spirit, openly admitted, without the equations of the modest Moscow physicist, their aircraft would never have taken to the skies. Later, Ufimtsev was involved as a consultant in the development of the fifth-generation F-22 Raptor fighter. Overseas, Pyotr Yakovlevich received respect and honor, but in his heart there always remained a quiet sadness that his native country had traded his genius for bureaucratic instructions. The history of the Soviet stealth is a drama about the very nature of the Soviet system, capable of producing geniuses who were ahead of their time in details, but shackled in the armor of nomenclature and bureaucratic egoism. What really doomed the Soviet stealth? Was it the inevitable technological failure of Soviet microelectronics, which lost the supercomputer race? Bureaucratic sabotage by the leaders of the military-industrial complex, who were protecting their comfortable chairs and old projects? Or were the Soviet strategists, in their own way, right in believing that against a strong opponent, no stealth aircraft would save the day? Write your opinion in the comments. Vote. Are you for the official version, or do you believe in a strategic combination by the special services? Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new declassified materials. See you in the next episode.